It all started on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I had wrapped up a business trip earlier than expected and decided to surprise my family by heading back to our lake cabin for the weekend. It was the kind of place that always calmed my nerves, tucked away in the woods, right by the water, away from the chaos of city life and HOA politics. The drive was peaceful. The sun was just starting to dip low, casting golden light through the trees as I pulled into the gravel driveway. I wasn't expecting any drama. In fact, I was looking forward to a cold drink and some silence. As I stepped out of my truck, something felt off. The driveway, which I had left empty, now had two unfamiliar vehicles parked in it, both of them dusty, with local parking tags that I didn't recognize. My heart rate picked up, not from fear exactly, but from confusion. Who was here? I hadn't given anyone access. No friends were scheduled to stay. No maintenance was booked. And yet, here these cars were, parked like they belonged. I didn't get far before I heard the sirens. That eerie, rising sound that instantly makes your stomach drop. A county patrol car rolled up behind me before I could even reach the porch. Then another. Two officers got out, hands resting casually on their belts, but eyes scanning me like I was the threat. They didn't start with questions. They started with orders. "Sir, step away from the house." I blinked. "This is my house," I said. "I own this property." One of them raised a brow. "We received a trespassing complaint from a resident of the Homeowners Association. Do you have ID?" And that's when I saw her, Karen. Every HOA has one, and ours was named Karen in every sense of the word. Short blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, always on her golf cart with a clipboard in hand, convinced she ran the neighborhood like some sort of suburban sheriff. She stood there across the road, arms crossed, lips pursed with smug satisfaction. The moment our eyes met, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an ambush. She didn't even pretend to be concerned. She just tilted her head and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That's the man I saw sneaking around the cabin. I told you he didn't belong there." The officers turned back to me, and suddenly I wasn't a homeowner anymore. I was a suspect. One of them asked for proof of ownership. I gave him my driver's license, pointed to the mailbox with my name on it, even tried pulling up my property documents on my phone. But it didn't matter. Not right away. Because in that moment, all they saw was a complaint from a familiar HOA board member and a man who showed up unannounced. While I was trying to keep calm and cooperate, I kept glancing toward the cabin. The lights were on. The curtains were drawn. Someone was inside. I asked the officers if they'd checked the interior before confronting me. They hadn't. I told them there shouldn't be anyone in that cabin, that I hadn't rented it, hadn't authorized anyone to be there. And that's when they got quiet. One officer stayed with me, while the other approached the porch, knocked, and waited. A long pause followed. Then the door creaked open, and a woman stepped out, one I'd never seen before. Mid-40s, wearing an oversized sweatshirt that didn't belong to her, looking more annoyed than surprised. That's when things shifted. The officer asked who she was. She gave a first name only, then mumbled something about being allowed to stay there. When pressed for specifics, she claimed she was a friend of Karen's. My jaw clenched. Karen, still standing across the street, suddenly found her shoes very interesting. The officer radioed something in, then asked if I wanted to press charges. I told him I didn't even know what was happening yet. The squatter, because that's what she clearly was, looked nervous now, like her story was about to crumble. She had no lease, no permission, no legal reason to be there. But the real betrayal wasn't just the squatting. It was the fact that Karen, my HOA neighbor, had called the cops on me to protect her friend. She knew I owned the cabin. She knew I wasn't a stranger. But instead of calling me directly or minding her own business, she weaponized the HOA's influence and law enforcement to cover up her friend's trespassing the moment the woman stepped out of my lake cabin and casually leaned against the doorframe like she belonged there. Everything in me shifted from confusion to something deeper, disbelief edged with anger. She wasn't startled. She wasn't panicking. She didn't stumble with excuses or act like someone caught red-handed. Instead, she acted annoyed, as if I was the intruder disrupting her peaceful day. That was when I knew this wasn't just some mistaken guest or a lost hiker looking for shelter. This woman had been here for a while, and she had no intention of leaving. She claimed she was a friend of Karen's, said it like it was a magic phrase that should explain everything. When the officer asked her how long she'd been staying here, she dodged the question. When he asked if she had permission from the property owner, she hesitated. And when he pointed to me and said, "That's the property owner," she shifted her weight and crossed her arms, still trying to keep her composure, but clearly losing control of the story. I could feel the tension in my jaw as I walked up the porch steps, slowly, carefully, until I stood just a few feet away from her. The officer let me pass once he saw how the situation was unfolding. I kept my voice calm but firm. "What are you doing in my house?" She blinked at me like I was being rude. "Karen said I could stay here for a while. She said the cabin was just sitting empty and you were never around." She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was some kind of open invitation from the neighborhood gossip queen that somehow overrode legal ownership. I couldn't even respond right away because I was stunned at how casually she said it. Like using my cabin was no different than borrowing sugar. I looked around. The place wasn't trashed, but it was clearly lived in. There were grocery bags on the counter, a pile of laundry by the fireplace, dishes in the sink. The back door was slightly ajar, and I could see a pair of sandals drying on the deck, like someone had just come in from lounging by the lake. The gall of it. This woman wasn't just squatting, she had moved in. I asked her directly if she had a lease, a key, anything that gave her the right to be here. She shook her head and shrugged. I thought it was fine. Karen said it was okay. That name again. Karen, as if it explained everything. I turned to the officer. "So let me get this straight. This woman admits she doesn't have permission from me, doesn't have a key I gave her, and has been living here based on hearsay from my HOA neighbor?" The officer didn't say anything at first. He was trying to keep things under control, but the situation was spiraling. The woman was clearly trespassing, but she was also playing the "I didn't know" card. She kept repeating that Karen told her it was all right, that she wouldn't get in trouble, that no one used the cabin much anyway. It was infuriating. She spoke about my private property like it was some unused community storage shed. Meanwhile, Karen had disappeared. The same woman who had been standing there just minutes earlier, arms folded and ready to see me get hauled away, was now nowhere in sight. She must have slipped away the moment her friend's story began to collapse. Back inside the cabin, I began looking for signs of how long this had been going on. The fridge was half full. Mail had been opened, my mail. Some of my things had been moved. One of my fishing rods was out of its case, lying across the dining table like it had just been used. My favorite throw blanket from the living room was bunched up on the couch, right next to an unfamiliar purse. This wasn't just a weekend visit. She'd been here for days, maybe even weeks. When I asked how she got in, she said the back door was unlocked, which was a lie. I lock that place like Fort Knox every time I leave. Then she changed her story, said Karen had a spare key. That part sent a chill down my spine, because the only spare key, to my knowledge, had been in a lockbox hidden near the deck. Unless Karen had found it, or had one copied, or worse, had been in my home before without my knowledge. I looked at this woman, this stranger who was now practically acting like a tenant, and realized I wasn't just dealing with a squatter. I was dealing with someone who had been invited to squat, by someone who was supposed to be a neighbor, someone who should have respected boundaries. Instead, Karen had treated my lake cabin like it was a vacation rental she could hand out as a favor. After the confrontation with the woman in my cabin and the casual way she dropped Karen's name like a VIP pass, I knew I had to dig deeper. Something about the entire situation felt rotten. Not just the illegal occupation of my property, but the way the HOA, particularly Karen, had immediately jumped to defend it. And not just defend it, cover it up. The more I observed, the more I realized this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was part of something deliberate, calculated, protected by people who believed they were untouchable because of their positions on the Homeowners Association board. The woman wasn't evicted immediately. Even though she admitted to not having any legal right to be there, the officers said they couldn't forcibly remove her without going through the proper process unless I wanted to press criminal charges. That bought her more time, and it gave Karen a chance to spin a new narrative. Within 24 hours, the neighborhood was buzzing, not with the truth, but with the version Karen had already begun spreading. According to the whispers, I had allowed a friend to use the cabin but forgot about it. Or I had miscommunicated my return date. Some said I was overreacting, that it was just a temporary arrangement between neighbors. The story kept changing, but the one constant was that Karen tried to make me look like the irrational one, the intruder in my own home. The HOA, instead of addressing the fact that one of their board members helped someone illegally occupy a private residence, tried to smooth it over like it was a minor neighborhood dispute. They wanted to avoid scandal, complaints, or any formal record that might taint their perfect little community image. When I requested a formal meeting with the HOA board to file a complaint, I was met with delays. Emails went unanswered. My request for a special session was under review. When I showed up to the regularly scheduled meeting to speak during the public comments portion, I was conveniently bumped off the agenda due to time constraints. I watched them shuffle papers, sip coffee, and casually talk about lawn care violations and mailbox designs, while completely ignoring the very real issue of one of their own abusing their position of power. Behind closed doors, Karen was rallying her allies. She'd been on the board for years, and in that time, had managed to surround herself with a little circle of loyalists, people who owed her favors or who enjoyed the petty control she exercised over community decisions. She wasn't just some nosy neighbor anymore. She had become the unofficial gatekeeper of the neighborhood. And now, she was using that influence to protect her friend, discredit me, and avoid any consequences. I started hearing from neighbors, the ones who weren't in her pocket, that this wasn't the first time something shady had happened involving Karen. One family claimed Karen had used HOA resources to get a contractor out to her property for free emergency repairs. Another said she routinely gave suggestions about who should be allowed to rent or sell their homes. She was running the place like a private club, and now that I was challenging her authority, I had become her newest threat. When I demanded a full review of the HOA's involvement and requested documentation of any correspondence or approvals regarding the woman in my cabin, I was told that no such records existed. Of course they didn't. Everything had been done through Karen's word-of-mouth manipulation, her weaponization of reputation, and her willingness to bend the rules in the shadows while preaching order in public. The real kicker came when I learned she had accessed the HOA's emergency contact database, a system intended for safety alerts like fires or break-ins, to find out my travel schedule based on an old entry I'd submitted for out-of-town notifications. That's how she knew I wouldn't be around. That's how she planned it. She used the same system meant to protect homeowners to undermine one of them, me. Still, the board refused to take formal action. When I pushed harder, they began accusing me of disrupting harmony in the neighborhood. That was their phrase. Harmony, as if reporting a felony was an inconvenience to their brunch schedule. They suggested mediation. They offered to resolve this quietly. I wasn't having it. They wanted to bury it. They wanted me to drop the issue, to pretend like it hadn't happened, to move on and let it go like a parking ticket. But every move they made was another brick in the wall they were building around Karen, shielding her from accountability and ignoring the real damage done. Once it became clear that the HOA had no intention of holding Karen accountable for her actions, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't just dealing with someone squatting in my cabin. I was facing a coordinated effort to deny, delay, and deflect responsibility from people who were supposed to protect the rights of homeowners. I realized that if I didn't gather undeniable proof, concrete, legal, bulletproof evidence, I'd never be able to fight back effectively. This wasn't going to be a matter of opinion or neighborly misunderstandings. I needed facts, timestamps, documentation, and records that no HOA spin or Karen-led whisper campaign could talk their way out of. The first thing I did was install security cameras around the cabin, discreetly. Motion-activated ones, inside and out. Not just for future protection, but to start capturing activity in case the woman returned. I wanted a record of who entered, when, and what they did. I also installed a smart lock on the front door with an access log, so I could prove whether anyone else had entered after I changed the locks. Then I went into full investigative mode. I combed through every inch of the cabin looking for clues, receipts, notes, anything left behind by the squatter that might tell me how long she'd been there or who she'd been in contact with. In one of the drawers, I found a crumpled receipt from a local grocery store dated 3 weeks before I came home. That alone proved she'd been living in the cabin far longer than the HOA or Karen would admit. Even more telling, there was a sticky note on the fridge with Karen's name and phone number written on it. That detail felt small, but it spoke volumes. She hadn't just wandered in. She'd been given a lifeline, a contact, a connection. I took photos of everything, documented it with timestamps. I wasn't going to leave anything to memory or chance. Next, I pulled my security camera logs from the cabin's old system that I'd had installed months earlier. Though the cloud storage was limited, I was able to recover footage from several weeks prior. Grainy clips showing that same woman entering and exiting the cabin multiple times. In one clip, she was unloading bags from her car. In another, she was using my kayak, casually paddling across the lake, as if it were her own personal vacation spot. The logs showed movement, frequency, and most importantly, pattern. It proved that this wasn't a one-time accident. It was ongoing and intentional. I also started gathering property documentation, titles, legal deeds, utility bills, all addressed in my name, to demonstrate clear ownership. I even printed out screenshots of my digital key access history, which showed that no one had been granted a code to enter during the time she was there. Then I went a step further and requested logs from the local HOA's emergency contact system. At first, they refused, claiming the information was confidential. But after I got a lawyer involved and cited my rights as a dues-paying homeowner, they reluctantly turned over a report. That's where it got ugly. The access log showed that someone using a board-level admin account had retrieved my travel details. The timestamps matched the week before the squatter appeared. Karen had accessed my private schedule, data I had trusted the HOA to safeguard, and used it to time her little arrangement. That was no longer just unethical. That was a breach of privacy, and I had the paperwork to prove it. At this point, I wasn't just compiling a file. I was building a case. I met with a local real estate attorney and showed her everything. She was stunned, said it was one of the clearest cases of illegal occupancy and HOA misconduct she'd seen in years. We filed a formal trespassing complaint with the sheriff's office, this time including all the evidence I had gathered. The squatter was contacted and given a notice to vacate immediately. Karen was served with a cease and desist letter demanding she stop accessing or sharing any of my personal data through the HOA systems. But I didn't stop there. I created a detailed report, complete with evidence logs, emails, photos, and legal notices, and submitted it to the HOA board directly. I made sure it was entered into their meeting record so it couldn't be swept under the rug. No more phone calls. No more hallway conversations. I forced it into the official channel. Every email I sent included my lawyer in CC. Every request was backed by legal language. And everything was time-stamped and documented, so they couldn't claim ignorance or confusion. I wanted the HOA board to feel the pressure, to know that they weren't dealing with someone they could silence or gaslight. The days of whispers and behind-the-scenes scheming were over. I brought the whole situation into the light, and I did it with undeniable proof. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday evening in the community center, the same beige-painted room with folding chairs and lukewarm coffee that had hosted countless discussions about lawn violations and fence heights. But this meeting was different. I arrived early, not just with my binder of evidence, but with a printed timeline, a USB drive of video footage, and copies of every document I had legally gathered. This wasn't about making noise or creating drama. It was about facts. Cold, hard, irrefutable facts that exposed everything Karen and her inner circle had tried to hide. As the room filled with residents, I could feel the usual atmosphere shift. People whispered, glanced in my direction, looked uneasy. News had spread. Some knew what I was there for. Others didn't yet, but they could tell this wasn't going to be the usual HOA snooze fest. Karen walked in late, with her signature smugness barely intact. She kept her chin up, lips tight, trying to look unbothered. But her eyes darted toward the folder in my hand. She knew what was coming. When the public comments section opened, I stood, requested the floor formally, and began speaking. My tone was calm, measured. No theatrics, just truth. I walked the board and the residence through the entire sequence of events, from the moment I arrived early at my lake cabin and was met by police to the discovery of a squatter inside who claimed Karen had invited her. I outlined how the HOA had refused to address the situation, blocked my request for action, and tried to bury the incident under layers of delay. Then I started presenting evidence. I projected security camera footage onto the screen behind the board table, clips of the squatter entering the property, unloading her belongings, using the amenities as if she lived there. I passed around dated grocery receipts found in the cabin, photos of personal belongings left behind. The note with Karen's phone number scrawled across a sticky pad on my refrigerator. I played a short audio clip of the squatter admitting that Karen said it was totally fine for her to stay there since I hardly used the place anyway. The room shifted from awkward silence to sharp attention. You could feel the discomfort growing, especially among the board members who had previously brushed me off. Some looked away. Some whispered to each other. A few sat still, eyes fixed on the evidence they could no longer ignore. Then I dropped the final piece, the HOA emergency contact log. The printed record showed that someone with admin privileges had accessed my travel information shortly before the squatter moved in. The login ID matched Karen's credentials. I had highlighted the entry and attached a timestamp. There was no denying it now. She had not only enabled the trespassing, she had used her position within the HOA to orchestrate it. I handed out copies of the cease and desist letter my attorney had sent, along with a formal complaint I was submitting to the local housing authority and the state HOA oversight board. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call her names. I simply presented the truth, layer by layer, until it formed an undeniable structure of misconduct and abuse of power. Karen didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, she stumbled, claimed she was just trying to help a friend, and didn't think it would escalate. She tried to twist it into a misunderstanding, but her voice lacked conviction. She could feel the walls closing in. The board members, who had once nodded along to her every word, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They asked for copies of my documentation. They began whispering legal terms to each other. Liability, privacy violation, abuse of authority. Then residents started speaking. One neighbor stood up and said he'd always felt uncomfortable with how much personal data the HOA collected and how little oversight there was. Another said she remembered seeing the squatter jogging near the lake several times and assumed she was a guest. A third said they had their own concerns about Karen's behavior, unrelated to my case, and wondered how many others have been afraid to speak up. Momentum was shifting, not just against Karen, but against the culture of unchecked power that she represented within the HOA. My goal wasn't just personal justice, it was transparency. I wanted to show the community that this wasn't just one neighbor stepping out of line, but a broken system that protected insiders and punished anyone who questioned them. By the time the meeting ended, the room was buzzing. Board members promised a full review. Neighbors approached me quietly, thanking me for speaking up, some even admitting they had suspected Karen of misusing her position for years. The silence that once surrounded her authority had cracked. And now, finally, the people were listening. The morning after the board meeting, I filed the official eviction notice through the county clerk's office. The squatter was given 72 hours to vacate the property, and I made sure a copy was hand-delivered, emailed, and posted on the cabin's front door with photographic proof for the record. The legal process had taken some time to prepare, but I had everything in order: ownership documents, footage, the admission of unauthorized occupancy. The sheriff's office confirmed they would assist if necessary. This wasn't about intimidation. It was about making sure that justice was served through the correct channels, without any more HOA interference. Within 48 hours, the woman was gone. A neighbor texted me a photo of her loading up her car in the early morning, avoiding attention. She didn't leave a note. She didn't apologize. She left behind trash, a broken lamp, and a lingering scent of entitlement. But she was out. That was what mattered. I had my property back, and this time, I changed every lock, updated the security system, and made sure the place was secure like a fortress. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't going anywhere quietly, but she wasn't in control anymore. The community was starting to see her for who she really was, and the evidence I had presented at the board meeting had created waves far beyond that one evening. Word spread fast. Residents who had previously stayed silent started coming forward with their own experiences. Some spoke of petty fines they believed were personal. Others had stories of Karen making threats about violations if they didn't comply with her suggestions. She had ruled the neighborhood through a mix of manipulation, intimidation, and false charm for years. Now the dam had broken. A few days after the eviction, I received an update from a board. Due to the public pressure and formal complaint I filed, a special session had been scheduled to vote on Karen's removal. The meeting would be held in 2 weeks, giving residents time to review the materials I submitted and gather their own thoughts. Petitions had already begun circulating. It was clear that this wasn't just about my case anymore. It had become a referendum on her entire tenure. In the meantime, I submitted an official request to audit all HOA board communications for the previous 12 months. Under state HOA law, members have the right to request and review non-confidential communications that affect community decisions. At first, I was stonewalled, told it would take time due to volume. But again, once I involved my attorney and cited the specific statute, the board relented. What I found was even more disturbing. Dozens of email threads in which Karen had discussed homeowners' personal situations, travel plans, renovation projects, even disciplinary complaints, often with sarcasm, bias, or outright gossip. She had used her position to meddle in people's lives, not serve them. That audit report became part of a growing file I prepared for the oversight body that governs HOA conduct in our state. I wasn't just filing complaints. I was giving them a roadmap of everything Karen had done to compromise the board's integrity. The misuse of data, the unauthorized entry arrangements, the pattern of favoritism. The more I uncovered, the more it became clear that this wasn't an isolated case. It was systemic. She had built a system that served her and her friends and punished anyone who didn't fall in line. On the night of the special session, the room was filled beyond capacity. People stood in the back, leaned against the walls. Some even gathered outside the open windows just to hear. Karen sat at the table, still clutching her binder like it was a shield. But her eyes no longer scanned the room with confidence. She avoided eye contact. She knew this time was different. One by one, residents took the mic and shared their experiences. Some were emotional, some were blunt, but all were united in one message: enough. They had tolerated too much for too long. They had allowed one person to distort the meaning of community and twist the rules for personal gain. The vote to remove her was not just about justice. It was a reclaiming of trust. The board counted votes in silence. When the tally was announced, there was no cheer, no applause, just quiet shared relief. Karen was removed from her position effective immediately. The board promised an internal review of all policies and proposed amendments to ensure this kind of unchecked control could never happen again. That week, I sat on the deck of my lake cabin for the first time in peace. No threats, no trespassers, no manufactured drama from across the street. Just the sound of water, the whisper of wind through the trees, and the knowledge that I had stood up not just for myself, but for every homeowner who'd been quietly bullied into silence.